Cathcart, I want to introduce all of you to John Walsh of First Insurance Funding. Many of you have met John, and John and his firm First Insurance Funding are a great partner for us. And when I heard about the opportunity to co-brand Jim's book as a Tolman Wiker version of the Self Motivation Handbook, I reached out to John and asked if he would be willing to sponsor this for our team. And he didn't hesitate and went to his executive team and got the blessing. Didn't hurt that some of his executive team were Cal Lutheran alumni, and both Jim and I serve on the School of Management Advisory Board at Cal Lu, so there was a great connection there. But it was the content of Jim's work and the message that resonated with John and his team, and I hope resonates with you. And I just really want to thank John for supporting this, and also some of his executives who may be on the phone with us today. Frank Burke, who's the chairman at First Insurance, Mark Steenberg, the CEO, Jim Miller, Executive Vice President, Sales and Marketing, Dan Johnson, Regional Sales Manager, and Tim Parenti, VP Sales. Please give them a warm thank you from Tolman Wiker. So, you are in for a real treat this morning. Jim Cathcart, the author of the Self Motivation Handbook, is a nationally recognized speaker and self-made businessman. Jim runs the Cathcart Institute. He is an expert sales trainer and motivational speaker, speaks internationally to audiences across the globe, literally. His story is very inspiring because he literally is a self-made man, and he'll probably share some of that with you, and certainly in his... Can we have whoever's on the line with us to mute it? Anyway, so Jim's story is very powerful, and his message is very powerful, and he has been recognized nationally and internationally. He has a Golden Gavel Award. He's in the National Speaker Hall of Fame. He's been the president of the National Speakers Association. And if you look on his lapel, you'll see a golden microphone. In the world of professional speaking, that is the equivalent of an Academy Award. And so it is a great honor, and I think a privilege for us to not only share this work by Jim with you all, but to have him here this morning to speak to you personally. So please join me in a warm Tolman Wiker welcome for Mr. Jim Cathcart.
Thank you very much, Greg. What a treat to be here, and what a cool location. I love this. This is gonna be fun. I want to take a moment though and say thank you also to John Walsh. John, I appreciate the sponsorship that you stepped up for Tolman Wiker, and I have something for you. Would you join me here for a second? This is a pewter acorn. And if you think about an acorn, it's got three parts. It has a stem, a cap, and a seed. So the stem represents the legacy between this acorn and all the oaks that ever existed in the history of time, especially those in its line. So when it comes to you, that represents all the people that made you possible, all the people that made your company possible, their contributions. So there's the legacy. And then the cap holds on to the seed till it's ready to grow on its own. So the cap represents the coaches, the mentors, the guides, the role models, the people you look to for examples, parents, and those that watched over you. And then the seed contains the potential not only that's still in you, but in all future generations that will be touched by you and by all of those that you work with. So nurture your nature, and thank you.
I'll save it forever.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and welcome. And I'm so happy all of you have a copy of the Self Motivation Handbook, because that's my newest baby, number 17, 17th book I've written and published. And number 18 is in editing right now. But the Self Motivation Handbook has more of me in it, I think, than any of the books I've written. One of the books I'm well known for is Relationship Selling. I was the original author of that book, and that concept stated that way back in the 1980s. And it's done really, really well. And another book, The Acorn Principle, from which came the metaphor. That one's done really, really well. But this one is one where I got to tell my story and really share all of the ideas that I've used and I've seen used by thousands of others over these 40 years I've been a professional speaker and author, that truly are practical ways to become better, create a better life, and make more of a difference in the world. How many of you have already had a chance to read quite a bit of the book? Good, okay. And how many of you wouldn't have raised your hands no matter what I had said? Okay, I just want to know who I'm working with here. Thank you. Well, thank you for the time you spent with the book. I wrote the book in such a way that you can just pick up the book, thumb through it to a random page, and have something worth reading. So it's not a linear book like a novel would be or like a typical how-to book. What it is a compilation. It's a handbook, literally, meaning that I intend for people to write in it. For you to go in there, find an idea you like, and make some notes about that idea, and maybe set the book down for now, and then come back to it later. Some people read straight through and then come back to it. Some people just skip around in it. I saw a guy the other morning at breakfast. I was having coffee at a coffee shop where I play guitar and sing sometimes, and he said, "Hey, I got your book." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Yeah, I love that book." And then he was leaving, and I was sitting down, and I said, "Be sure and look on page 263. He said, "Got it." Clue. I just pulled the number out of there. Because I knew the way the book was structured that he would read something that would take like 1 minute to read, and then he'd say, "Oh, well, that's interesting." And he'd read at least 2 pages. So when you're talking with someone about the book, you say, "Hey, look at number 59, whatever that is." This is one of the myths. It relates to one of the myths about motivation. Everyone is motivated, but only the successful will admit it. I've had people say to me, He said, someone asked me the other day, "How many people work for you?" And I said, "About half." And he said, "I've got people that just aren't motivated." And I said, "I disagree. Everyone is motivated. It's just that you don't agree with some of their motives." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, tell me about some of the people that aren't motivated." He said, "Well, they show up late. They don't do their work unless you're watching. They never initiating. They don't contribute any new ideas. I said, "Well, they're motivated." He said, "To what?" I said, "Avoid work." It is a motive, isn't it? The avoidance of responsibility is a motive. Of course it is, yeah. And if you're motivated to avoid recognition or work or involvement or whatever, then obviously there's not a great deal of payoff to that, but some people are motivated that way, and they act on those motives, and it shows up in their behavior. All of us are motivated. It's just that some of our motives are productive and some of our motives are not. So everyone's motivated, but only the successful will admit it. You ask people, "Are you motivated?" And they kind of reflect on, if I say I'm motivated, will that impress him? Or he'll say, "Yeah, right." No, I'm not. Whatever. They just don't want to. They don't want to sit in the front row, for example. In life, there are front rows everywhere you go. In everything you do, there's a front row factor. And I find that the more motivated, the more focused and goal-oriented people tend to be, the more likely they are to sit up close, to assure that they're going to be involved, that they're kind of fully immersed in the experience, whatever that experience is.
Figures that are finance team. Get our finance team right up front. I love it.
Front row. That's right. That's right. Front row. Okay. Years ago, I joined a group called the JCs, the Junior Chamber of Commerce, and it was huge at the time. I'm a baby boomer. I was born on the first year of the baby boom, 1946. I'll say, do the math. Next week, I'll be 70. Okay. I graduated high school in 1964. That's the end of the baby boom. 78 million people in that cohort born between those 2 dates. And as they move through the age wave, as Ken Dykewald calls it, then the marketplace shows evidence of their presence pretty profoundly. You know, in the 50s, diapers were a really good investment, right? Today, it wouldn't be nearly the investment it was back then, but Medicare supplement, yeah, really, really good idea today. So when you think about, I'm thinking about the JCs, when you think about what is it that motivates people to do what they do? The JC's purpose back then was leadership training through community service, whereas Lions and Rotary and Civitan and others like that, their job was to do community service. The JCs said our job is to train young people to become productive adults, well-equipped business people, you know, ready to enter the marketplace and do something. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do community service like the others, but in our case, we're going to plan it in advance in writing, we're going to discuss it as a group, then we're going to go do it, and then we're going to evaluate it, and then we're going to submit a report at the end. So every time we do a project, whether it's a neighborhood cleanup or walkathon for March of Dimes or whatever it happens to be, it's going to be a learning experience that teaches leadership skills to the people involved. So I got involved in the JC so that I could be sort of paying my dues to society. You know, as a citizen, I figured I was benefiting a lot. I should do something to give back. So I got involved. And the rule the JCs had was at age 36 you had to get out. Today they've made that age 40. But they had 356,000 members. And I got involved just to kind of reach out and do something. And I found that I loved the leadership training. I absolutely loved it. I got the Officers and Directors Guide, which was about that thick, and read it 3 times cover to cover, including captions under the photos. I mean, every single word. And at every meeting, I was sitting in the front row and I said, hey, I'll try. I don't know how to do that, but I'll volunteer. And so I kind of over-immersed myself. Let me define that. 400 meetings in 2 years. 400 meetings after work, on weekends and holidays for free for 2 years. So I was fanatically involved in the JCs. And I became a lifelong front row sitter. Whatever I go get involved with, I step up as if I were having a reserved seat in the front row. Like when Greg and I go to the Cal Lutheran School of Management Dean's Advisory Council meetings, I show up early and I help arrange furniture and put out the handouts. You know, I talk with the catering people and ask if I can help with some of the silverware or something. I mean, I just assume ownership in whatever I'm involved in, and boy has that paid off for me. Because I've had people where I had no power, no authority whatsoever, where I was just another attendee, but I was behaving like that. And I've had people who were in positions of authority say, hey, would you sit over here with me? I'd like you involved in this thing that we're doing. You know, in other words, I started getting invitations that would never have come about had I not shown that behavior pattern. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about motivation. And then some people say, well, you know, motivation's no good. What? No, it doesn't last. I said, you mean like eating? No. You mean like sleeping? You mean like exercise? No. Breathing, perhaps. That didn't last. Bathing? Still a good idea? Yeah. Okay. You know, it doesn't last. It's a non-issue. Most things in life don't last. They will say, education lasts. No. How many of you have had this happen? You knew something. You had learned it. It was in there, right? And the moment came when you needed it, and you reached, and it was back in some other file. How many have had that happen? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not what we know that counts. It's what we can use when we need it. That's what matters. So even education, which is semi-permanent, needs to be refreshed to get it out of the filing system and onto the desktop for the moments when we need it most, right? Okay, so let me walk you through a couple of thoughts here. Motive, action. That's what motivation is. A motive without action is simply a dream or a fantasy. Action without motive, with no reason to take the action, is just random behavior, right? But put the two together and you have motivation. This is, by the way, my company logo. C, Cathcart, I, Institute, and a person emerging from the acorn, so it, the metaphor kind of works there. But think about that. It's not enough to just have a motive. It's not enough to just take action. You need to take action in ways that activate the motives that you want to see fulfilled. So the world asks you the constant question, what do you want? Right? What do you want? When you pull up onto the freeway and you're about to do the entry ramp thing, the other traffic is looking at you like, okay, what do you want? What are you going to do? And if you don't signal, or if you don't speed up appropriately, or you don't whatever, where they can merge, then they're saying, hey, come on, play by the rules, do the right thing here, right? Okay? When you go to a coffee shop and you walk up to the counter, they look at you, and that look that you see on their face is a question. What do you want? Right? Okay, when you sit on Santa's knee, Santa says, and what do you want? Right? So everywhere we go, it's what do you want? And when we are clear on what we want and we state it and we let other people see or know it, then they can adjust their behavior accordingly, and in many cases, make it more likely we'll get what we want. In some cases not, but most of the time, those who express their wants will tend to get their wants. That if you want to talk, remotely, then you can get on the loudspeaker here. So that works too. Okay. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, the future you see, in other words, what you envision for yourself in the future, defines the kind of person you're going to need to be to make that a reality. So let's say you see yourself in the future as the head of the LA Rams. Okay, they're moving to the region, right? So you see yourself in the future as being the chief executive officer of the LA Rams. I guess not. Whoever's talking, if you would hit the mute button, because we can all join in on your conversation. Thank you. So if you said, I want to be the head of the LA Rams, wouldn't you know what kind of things you would need to start learning in order to be qualified for that when the opportunity came? I mean, couldn't you figure it out? If I want to be the head of a major NFL sports team, what do I need to know? Who do I need to have on my team? What kind of people do I need to be around? What kind of credentials would be helpful to me? What should I study in my spare time? Is there any particular group of people I should be hanging out with pretty regularly and taking notes and listening more than talking, right? Where are the places I need to go? Where are the places I should avoid? What are the behaviors I should say, I'm never going to do that, because if I do that, it's going to reflect on the team and da-da-da-da, right? So whatever goal you set for yourself, when you see that future, that tells you what kind of person you need to be. And then the second question is, what kind of habits are you going to need to have that future? Because it's your habits that determine whether you're an eligible receiver or not. Not just your actions, not just your knowledge, not just your personal qualities, but your habits, the way they translate into motive and then action and become a part of who you are. This is what I call the causation chain of choices. We make choices as to our mindset, actions, etc. And there's a causation effect between these. So when you decide what future you want, what goals you have for your life, or whether it's traditional retirement, or whether you want a great athletic achievement, or whatever it happens to be, when you envision that future, you can pretty easily identify who you're going to need to know. Maybe not by name, but what kind of people you're going to need to know. And if you know what kind of people you need to know, then you know what sort of reputation would open the door to those people, and what sort of reputation would shut you out, and they would say, no thanks, right? Okay? And if you know what reputation you need, then you also know what habits would reflect that reputation, because a reputation is just observed patterns. your habit patterns, the way you deal with people, deal with things, the way you conduct yourself, the way you hold, dress and so forth, those patterns, when seen by others, are your reputation. So you can decide today what reputation you want 3 years from now, and systematically develop those habits and earn that reputation. Okay? If you know what habits you need, then you know which actions lead to those habits. Because a habit is just action repeated until it becomes instinctive or habitual. And if you know what actions you need to be taking in order to have the future you want, you know how you need to think, what kind of mindset you need to sustain. Because it's the way you look at the world that shows up in everything else along this whole continuum. So you could be, let's say you're raising a child and you want to teach that child to have an abundant life. They get to define what abundance is, but you want them to have all the possibilities that are available to them and to be able to make their best choices, right? The main thing you need to teach that child is not knowledge. It's point of view. It's attitude. It's perspective. It's worldview. It's belief system. Teach them how to think. I remember people early in my training career, they'd say, "What are you telling me how to think?" Yeah, I am absolutely telling you how to think. I'm not telling you you have to think this way, but I'm telling you this kind of thinking leads to these good results, and that kind of thinking leads to those bad results. Yes, I'm telling you how to think. You don't have to do it, but this is the best way, right? Okay. Does that work for you? That makes sense? Okay? So if that's the way things fit together, then the way we think day to day, the kind of words we use and the actions that we take day to day, just our simple routines, really do matter because it's going to increase or shrink the size of our potential future. So what if you don't expect too much? I didn't. If you look at me today and you say, okay, 40 years as a professional speaker, wow. 40 years and you've got all these awards and you've written all these books and, good for you, Jim. But you're gifted, you're special, you're not like me. Hey, I was born in 46 in Little Rock, Arkansas. Dad was a telephone repairman, so clearly I had the keys to the kingdom. So I had advantages other people didn't have. Mom was a housewife taking care of me and my little sister. And my grandfather had had a stroke, and I never knew him. I was around him a little bit when I was tiny, but by the time I got to waist high in my growth, he was completely invalid from the stroke, and he was in a hospital room in our front bedroom for 7 years. Never spoke, never left the bed, never moved. And so I had no sense of his personality. But that seemed normal to me, because that's what I grew up with. And whatever you grow up with, that seems like, well, that's normal. Don't you have grandparents in your front bedroom? You don't? Well, and my grandmother was in the house too, and she helped take care of him and take care of us. So I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, clearly gifted with opportunity, right there in the middle of the world of commerce where everything was taking place. And I expected ordinary. I figured I'd grow up to be a nice guy who lived in a middle-income suburban neighborhood like my parents did, and I would have a pleasant life, and then I would pass away. And I figured I'd retire at 65 because that was tradition, and that I would die at whatever the statistical norm was for my gene pool. Honestly, I expected almost nothing. I went to school, they gave me all the tests that they give all the kids, and I didn't excel on any of them, showing huge brain potential or things like that. I wasn't a natural athlete, so I didn't go out for the teams and excel in some way physically. I had a nice circle of friends, but I had an ordinary, unremarkable life. And then in 1972, I heard a voice on the radio one day. I was working as let me pause. 1972, I was newly married with a new baby son at home, Jim Cathcart Jr., and my wife worked as a secretary, and I was an assistant loan specialist for the housing authority. So I was a government clerk, and I was an assistant to a man who was not busy. I was making $525 a month though. So, I'm knocking down some serious bucks, but still, I was an assistant to a guy who didn't need an assistant. I was bored to tears. Little Rock, Arkansas Housing Authority. And I would sit there and doodle, I'd daydream, I'd read books on urban renewal. It was pretty clear to me that wasn't the path for me, but I would, I had a job to do, so I did it. And one day I was sitting there, and in the next room the radio was playing, and I heard this voice, deep fatherly voice, Earl Nightingale. Earl Nightingale was considered the dean of personal motivation. He was on 900 radio stations all over the world. Little 5-minute program called Our Changing World. And Earl said that day, and I'm sitting in the other room, just killing time, and I hear him really clearly, all the way down to the core of my being. He said, if you will spend 1 extra hour each day studying your chosen field, you will be a national expert in that field in 5 years or less. And I thought, wait a minute. An hour a day, let's say 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, take vacation. That's 1,250 hours. He's actually right. If anybody studied one subject for 5 consecutive years, 1,250 hours, they would be a leading authority, a national leading authority in that field. And I thought, even me, that's amazing. What do I want to be an expert at? Ain't urban renewal. And I thought, an hour a day, that's a lot, but, I'm a government clerk, I got 8 hours. So I could probably do this by next Thursday. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then a few weeks later, it hit me, you know what I really want to do? I want to do what the guy on the radio is doing. I want to be like Earl Nightingale. I want to help people grow. I had 2 conditions, though, that would tend to limit one's success as a professional speaker. I had never given a speech, and I had nothing to say. So I was starting, let's say, in the lower rungs on the totem pole, and I decided, doggone it, I want to do what he's doing. So what do? Well, I'll take him at his word. An hour a day of focused study in one field, extended over a 5-year time frame. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to become skilled at professional speaking. And so I started studying the field of personal development. I started studying psychology and applied behavioral science and all the things that would typically go with that field. And I read the classic books, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, See You at the Top, this was a few years later, by Zig Ziglar, name it, Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz, all the classic books of that era. Mandino's The Greatest Salesman in the World. Well, what happened was I started showing different behavior patterns, and my bosses noticed it. And they said, Jim, we'd like you to give up your precious job as assistant loan specialist and come to our headquarters office in downtown Little Rock and be the staff assistant to the board of directors. Well, okay. So, now all of a sudden I got to dress up a little bit more. I better carry myself with a little more respect. I got a serious job. And sure enough, I was doing some cool things. And one weekend I was at home and I got a phone call from a coworker. Hey, we just had a party for the Employees Association. I said, we have an Employees Association? Yeah, we just had a party, our annual party, and you're the new president. I didn't even know there was one, let alone know what it meant to be the president of something. I'd never been the leader of anything in my life. And so I took it seriously, and I started talking to people and asking what would an employees association do, and what should the president of one do. And then I got involved in the JCs about that same time, so I learned some things about it there. And I ended up getting free parking for all the employees and a whole bunch of other special privileges. And then made recommendations that helped smooth out some of the work processes, and I got raises, and life was pretty good, but I still was urban renewal, and I didn't want to do that. So I kept studying the field of personal development, and then I got opportunities to get more involved in that because my circle of friends changed. The people I'd been hanging out with weren't really all that much into personal development. So the fact that I've become fanatical about it, and I mean that textbook serious fanatical, that's all I want to talk about, think about, or be around. They'd say, well, let's don't go over to Jim's. Let's don't invite him, because that means, I mean, really. So they drifted away. We were still friends, but we didn't get together. People that were into that, people that were serious about goal setting and achievement and success, they found me fascinating, and I found them fascinating, and we started collaborating. And that had the effect that Napoleon Hill would call a mastermind effect. Where boom, 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 just growth and improvement came rapidly. Pretty soon I ended up selling Earl Nightingale's training materials door to door to businesses in Little Rock. So I got a new job doing that. Did that for a couple of years. Then the USJCs called, and they said, we'd like you to be the national headquarters chairperson in charge of leadership training for all 356,000 members. Could you move to Tulsa, Oklahoma? That could be arranged. I was there that night. I was. Honest to God, I was. I was that fanatical. And I didn't get the job when I got there. I was interviewing. So I got to Tulsa. I didn't even have a place to stay. I went to Tulsa and interviewed for the job. And they said, okay, we're going to make our decision later today. So, we'll call you back. Where are you going to be? And I said, here. And they said, well, okay. And I said, hey, if I got this job, where would my office be? Second floor, corner office. Okay. So I went up to the second floor of the corner office, talked to the people in there, and the desk was empty. And I said, what's the person in this job working on right now? Putting together a workbook to go with this audio album. Okay. So I sat down and I started working on that. And a guy came by and he said, who are you? Jim Cathcart. What are you doing here? I'm applying for this job. What are you working on? He said, dude, you don't have this job. I said, yeah, but the work needs to be done, right? He said, yeah. And I said, so if you'll excuse me. So he left. Well, about an hour later, I got a call, please come down to the executive office, you're hired. And I worked there for 2 years, flew all over the country doing speeches and seminars, writing and training manuals, and got to meet and collaborate with Og Mandino, the author of The Greatest Salesman in the World, Zig Ziglar, W. Clement Stone, who was the personal manager of Napoleon Hill that wrote Think and Grow Rich, and was at the time one of the richest men in North America, owned Combined Insurance Company of America. All these people who were my heroes all of a sudden are my collaborators. And so in 1977, I went out on my own full time as a professional speaker and author. I've done 3,000 speeches, been literally all the way around the world twice in 1 month. Inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame, on and on and on. Oh my gosh! Now think about this. I'm not telling you that to impress you about me. I'm telling you that to prove my point about all this actually works. Okay? Where did I start, and what kind of advantages did I bring? A few, but not a lot. I had a loving family. I was born into a free society in the United States. There were a lot of benefits I had, but not benefits that would give me an edge over the other people around me. Okay? So when I talk about these concepts and this system actually working, I personally made it work, and I've seen thousands of other people over the years do the same things. Let me show you something else. What if you don't expect much and you're 52 pounds overweight? That's me. 200 pounds. This is me at 150. That's my lovely wife Paula and me at the JC's convention wearing our looks like a Halloween costume. Everything was working in my life except one. I was fat. and I was out of shape. And I decided I need to change my fitness level. Okay. Hello? There you go. Thank you. I needed to change my fitness level. So what would I do? Well, I thought maybe I could become a jogger. I had a friend that was a jogger. But I tried that and it didn't feel good. It hurt. It was not pleasing. I thought, well, but I want to be a jogger. And then the people who were not in good shape told me, oh, you shouldn't do it. It's bad for your knees, or it's bad for your ankles, or your neighbors won't like you, or bees will be attracted to, whatever. They came up with all these excuses, but they weren't fit. So I figured, discount that, right? And I decided, okay, I'm going to be a runner, but I don't want to run. So what can I do to get myself to run? You know what I can do? I can just put on my running shoes. That I can commit to. So I said, okay, every single day, I will put on my running shoes and walk to the curb. And I made an absolute commitment that every day, without exception, wind, rain, ice, whatever, I would walk to the curb with my running shoes on. One night I was getting ready for dinner, to go out for dinner, and I was dressed up, and I was with Paula. We're in the car, and I'm, dressed up. I've got on a suit. And so, we're sitting in the driveway, and it occurs to me, I haven't put on my running shoes and gone to the curb today. I said, excuse me, put in the park, went back in the house, took off my dress shoes, put on my running shoes, walked outside, touched the curb, walked back inside, put on my dress shoes, got in the car, said, okay, we can go. Do you think I got a little bit of criticism, or shall we say resistance, to following that pattern? Absolutely. I got a lot of resistance, not just in my immediate family, but from other people around me. They said, that's unreasonable, Jim. Don't do this. This is just silly. It doesn't help your fitness. If you go to the curb with your running shoes on, what is the difference in likelihood of you going for a little run? Vastly increased, exponentially increased, right? So I started running half a block, one more tree, next corner, got to where I could run 5 miles a day. The weight just dripped off of me. I lost 52 pounds. I got to where I was running half marathons. My whole world changed. I had to have my wedding ring resized because I had lost so much weight. And all I committed to was putting on my running shoes and going out to the curb. So that's the concept, that's sort of the organizing idea in the whole book. By the way, in the graphic on the cover of the book, if you look real close, there's an acorn logo in the base of each shoe. I didn't know they did that until after I got the books. I think that's kind of clever. Kind of nice. So today, I'm living an abundant life. I've had some of the most wonderful experiences in the world. And I'm really, really happy to be living where I'm living and involved with the people I am. This is the concept from the ACORN principle. A daily question. How would the person I'd like to be do the things I'm about to do? If you think like the future you and do the little things today like that person would do, then you'll be much more likely to achieve the success you want. This is something that's in the book. It's a free item, but a lot of people overlook it. Thrive 15 is a company in Tulsa, Oklahoma that has well over 1,000 short video lessons on interpersonal skills, health and fitness, business, sales, all kinds of things like that from a number of different authors. I'm one of their faculty members. And 1,000 different programs in there that you can watch very quickly and easily. And if you go to thrive15.com and put in the code word ACORN, you get 30 days of free access to all 1,000 of those programs. I've got 110 short videos in there. So, you can subscribe to it for like $19 a month, but for a month you get full free access if you'd like. And it's in the back of the book, like 3 or 4 pages of links. So that's the book, and that's the concept. But let me tell you in closing what the possibilities can become. I told you that I was this overweight, out of shape, kind of a pleasant loser. working for the Housing Authority, and I heard Earl Nightingale on the radio. And I told you that a couple of years later, I met a man who was selling Earl Nightingale's training materials, recordings, and he had me go to work for him, selling those door to door to businesses. And then I went to work for the USJCs, and then I left there and I went out into the world as a professional speaker and trainer based in Tulsa, Oklahoma for the first few years. And then I moved to San Diego, La Jolla, and met Dr. Tony Alessandra, a college professor, and we formed a partnership and started collaborating. And we got to the point where we were doing like 120 or 130 talks a year each, flying, virtually every day. We're in an airport somewhere, flying to another engagement. One day I came back home, I was sitting in the office, phone rang, I picked it up, and on the other end was the voice of Earl Nightingale. I thought it was a recording. It was a guy. He said, "May I speak to Jim Cathcart?" And I said, "Oh." Which means, "Yes, sir, this is he, how may I help you?" And I said, "This is Jim Cathcart." He said, "Well, this is Earl Nightingale." I said, "I know, because I've been listening to 1,000 hours of him over the years. The same recordings again and again and again to reprogram my thinking." And he said, "I just read an article of yours that would make a good recorded program." I said, "Well, that article is a recorded program called Relationship Strategies." He said, "Well, send it to me." So I did. And he said, he called back and he said, "We would like to publish this." So Nightingale Conant published our audio album, Relationship Strategies for Dealing with the Differences in People, in 1984. And in 84 and 85, they sold $3.5 million worth of that album. In 1972, I heard Earl Nightingale on the radio. In 1974, I was selling Earl Nightingale's recordings. In 1984, he was selling mine. This can really make a difference. And then I had a phenomenal privilege and responsibility. In 1989, I was president of the National Speakers Association, which is about 4,000 professional speakers. No listeners, just speakers. And it's a wonderful group of people. But I was their national president in '89. And I had called Earl Nightingale and asked him, "Would you do me the honor of sitting on stage with me in front of our 2,000 people at our annual meeting? And let me interview you about the history and evolution of this field of personal development." He said, "I might do that." He said "might" because it was a non-paid engagement. And then a couple months later, I got a call from his wife, Diana. She said, "Jim, Earl passed away." She said, "We are not going to have a funeral because he was cremated and we spread the ashes here at home, but I'd like to have a memorial service for him at your convention." I said, "Absolutely, we'd be honored." She said, "I want you to speak." I said, No, that's inappropriate." I said, I'll introduce somebody, but no, because I'm not worthy. I mean, this should be giants speaking at this event, because he's influenced people all over the world." She said, "No, you don't get it, Jim. You are the product that he was trying to produce." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You started with virtually nothing going for you except ambition. And you took the ideas that he presented and you applied them over an extended period of time. And you became successful in your field. You are the product of what Earl was teaching. So it's absolutely appropriate you would speak at his memorial." Okay, so I spoke. I spoke for just a few moments, but the only speakers at his memorial service were his widow, a recorded video from Dr. Dennis Waitley, the author of The Psychology of Winning, and me. Unbelievable. I mean, I still get chills thinking about that today. Consider for a minute the journey from clerk at the Housing Authority all the way to being the only outside speaker at his memorial service. The power of these ideas may seem trivial at first, but the collective influence of this kind of thinking in your life, this kind of behavior pattern or new commitment by you, can absolutely transform your world, and you have no idea how big it could be. Thank you. for letting me share some thoughts with you.
Is this mic on?
Yes, it is.
If you have questions for Jim, he has a few minutes, and more importantly, if you have feedback, for those of you who have spent a few minutes and opened the book, Jim would love to hear your thoughts about how you've experienced the ideas that you've seen or felt from opening up his Self Motivation Handbook. So if there are any of those in the audience, we'd love to hear about
Yeah, what I'd like to.
how you've experienced these
Thank you.
ideas.
Thank you, Greg. What I'd like to do for that is just have a video camera, have you 15 to 30 seconds, just say, one of the things I like about the book is X, and if I can get maybe half a dozen of those little testimonial comments, that'd be awesome, because I'd like to put them on the webpage when people go to find the book, and you see, this is what people get out of it. Okay, so thank you for that.
And we
I'll
can
be happy
even
to sign your
do
book.
that,
Yeah.
offline.
Oh, yeah.
We can
Yeah.
gather that up. I'll
Sure.
send an email out to volunteers, and I presume that there will be some, and I'll be one of them, and we'll gather that up.
And I'll be happy to tell you who the other volunteers will be.
Oh, perfect.
No, I'm joking. And I'll happily, sign your books and personalize them for you, and answer any questions. Do you have any quick questions or comments? Yes,
So you still running?
still running.
How do you eat?
I do mountain trail running 3 days a week with a group called the Heartbreak Hiking Fools. So we do 6 miles of going for a personal best on mountain trails. We've got 26 trails in the Santa Monica's that we run. And I mean, it's really pushing it every day, trying to get a personal record. And how do I eat? I eat sensibly. For example, when I drink coffee, I drink black coffee. Well, when I grew up, 4 spoons of sugar and cream, right? And it took me a while to retrain my taste buds to be okay with just plain old black coffee. It took like 2 or 3 months. But after that 2 or 3 months, I preferred the black coffee. And the same thing for soft drinks. People drink water just to drink water. Who knew? I was drinking, it was iced tea with sugar in it, or it was and lemon, or it was soft drinks or something like that. I never drank water to quench my thirst, or water with a meal. What a concept. I started doing things like that, and it really changed the calorie intake. Because there's only one way to lose weight, and it has 2 parts. Take in less, burn up more. And you don't get to choose either or, you have to do both, right? Okay, so all diets work. Not all dieters work. Okay, so just choose one that's sensible, eat intelligently, and retrain your habits so that you don't say, oh, thank heavens I lost the weight, where are the Cheetos? Yes.
What book's on your nightstand right now?
What book is on my nightstand right now? Well, first off, I don't put them on my nightstand, but that I understand the question. They are in the living room on an end table, and I have a number of books there. I'm so well connected now in the National Speakers Association that I'll get maybe 3 books a month from colleagues who have just released a new one. Terry Shodin, S-J-O-D-I-N, Terry Shodin just released a book. She's a sales trainer, and her book's called Scrappy, and it's innovative ideas for how to gain the edge when you don't have one. And that's a fascinating book. And then I've got a number of others. Yes?
So you said during your time of when you first started out, you had to travel a lot, your circle of friends changed, and there was just a lot of, you became fanatical with your new path.
Yep.
Did you have to sacrifice time with family?
No, actually, because I was way busier, there was less time with my family. But I've been, and this is a key word for everyone to keep in mind, intentional. Look at your day from the time you open your eyes all the way until the time you go to sleep, and try and figure out what percentage of that day was that way because you meant to be that way? What percentage of your day is intentional? And what percentage of it is either random or spontaneous or something like that? Or just in neutral? I increased the percentage of my life that was intentional. I was really intentional in the way I raised my son. When I was on the road a lot, I knew that not being physically present was going to have an impact on him, so I needed to compensate. And so every day I would call home from wherever I was, and I would talk with Paula for a minute or two, and then I'd say, put Jimmy on the phone. Okay. You know, and I would talk with him, and it'd be just like I was there in the room, that kind of a conversation. And then I'd talk to Mom again and hang out. And then when I'd get home, I would do things like, one time I went to his grammar school, and he was in first grade, and I asked for permission from the school to have lunch with him. And they said yes. And so I went and stood in the appropriate place when the class got out and they were coming down the hall to go to the lunchroom. I stood to where I could connect with the group, and he came up, and he looked up and he said, hey, Daddy, what are you doing here? I said, came to have lunch with you. Oh, cool. So we walked down the hallway, and we get in line. And we're going through the line, and we get our trays, you know, and then we get our little carton of milk, and we get our other stuff, and then we sit down. Way down at this tiny little table, and I had lunch with him. And then we talked for a minute or two, and then he said, I said, you want to go out and play? He said, mm-hmm. I said, okay, go ahead. So, you know, we did things like that. One time I was gone, he was older, and I said, hey, when I get home, let's camp out. He said, where? I said, in your room, but we're going to do a sleepover. He said, okay. So I got home, I'd already cleared it with Mom, and went up to his room, and we spread out sleeping bags on the floor, and we went downstairs and had dinner with Paula, and then we went upstairs and we played games and told stories and things like that, and then we laid down on sleeping bags and talked after the lights were out until we both fell asleep. And the next morning we got up and we made breakfast and took breakfast to Paula in bed. You know, I created moments to make up for the physical absence. And it's interesting, he's 45 now. And I talked with him about that recently, and he said, you know, I never felt you were gone. I never felt like my dad wasn't around. Isn't that cool? Yeah. Thank heavens it worked. Another quick question, and I want to allow you to have your own day too.
Did you do the hour a day for 5 years?
Absolutely, yeah. As a matter of fact, when I decided to lose the weight, I made a commitment to a new eating regimen. I decided that I was going to cut out sugar, flour, white bread, and second helpings. You know, it's interesting. Second helpings are exactly twice as fattening as first helping. But that's not a scientific diet. That's just one that cuts out a whole lot of starch, right? Sugar, refined sugar, you know, not fruit, because that's natural sugar, and it digests differently. Flour, white flour, so bleached flour that has virtually no nutritional value. Potatoes. Well, what's wrong with potatoes? Nothing unless you abuse them. I did. I didn't eat a potato. I ate a fried potato, or a baked potato with sour cream and chives and bacon bits and butter underneath, you know, just for padding. And, or scallop potatoes, or potatoes. Mashed potatoes and gravy with
Now we're talking.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Anyway, I cut out sugar, white flour, potatoes, and second helpings for 5 years. I didn't go on a little diet to lose some weight. I went on an eating change to absolutely reprogram my relationship with food. And in doing so, I found I don't miss potatoes at all. I'll taste some potatoes from time to time, but I never have a serving of them anymore. Because I always found it was an extra food on top of all the other food, never instead of, ever. I mean, you don't go get French fries, you go get a burger and fries. You want fries with that? Right? So it was always that way, and in doing that, it made a huge difference. Yeah.
Jim, quick one. I had the privilege to listen to Og Mandino in 1988. And think of that, fax machines had just come out, things have changed a little bit. And I had these little notes, I always took notes on anybody that spoke. And Og said, people will retain, like a prospect, retain 10% of what you tell them 10 minutes after you leave.
Yeah,
Do you agree with that?
yeah, that's pretty close.
So today, 2016, we've got email, we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, we've got LinkedIn, we've got all these distractions. And I think it's a lot worse today than it was back in 1980 when we had no technology.
Yeah, well, it's a lot different today. We get more information now than we got back then, but we don't necessarily retain a great deal more of it. Someone said a few years ago that the amount of information a person in America sees and processes today is like a year or more of information that people got 50 or 75 years earlier than that. Wow. So yes, there's more information. You had a quick question.
Do you still do an hour a day?
No, not an hour a day, but then again, my whole life has been reconfigured around this field of personal development. So all of my habit patterns now reflect that. But I do have a specific number of disciplines, things that I will always do. And whatever, I stop occasionally and do a checkup, mental, physical, family, social, spiritual, career, financial, emotional, which ones are working, which ones need attention. Because whichever one you're neglecting, it's gonna wait until some inconvenient moment and then it'll say, my turn, and it's gonna take over. So if you don't take care of your health will take over you. And it will say, let's go to the hospital, right? So you have to spend time occasionally taking care of each of those areas, or you end up broke, or you end up sick, or you end up losing all your friends, or you end up something, So all of them matter, but not all the time, or shouldn't get your attention all the time. This is really a treat for me, and I'm conscious of the time, so thank you for the commitment you've made. And I'll be happy to sign and personalize your books, and I'm glad I'm part of your team now. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And everybody, have a great day.